That morning at the airfield, things were calm. It wasn't a busy day. A few cadets were going through their pre-flight preparations, an instructor was walking the line, and a maintenance crew was inspecting the brakes of an old, weathered F-16. The airfield was peaceful, almost quiet. Yet, amidst the stillness, no one noticed the old man standing by the fence. He was positioned at the edge of the tarmac, hands behind his back, staring out at the runway like he had been there for decades. No one knew his name. No one cared to ask. It wasn't until one young pilot, caught in the middle of his checklist, overheard someone mention the old man's name. At that moment, the young pilot froze, mid-step, mid-breath. It was as though time had come to a halt, and the world itself paused. There was something about that name. Something that sent a jolt through him, as if the old man's presence suddenly made sense. Everything around him seemed to slow down, and in that brief moment, the airfield felt different. How many heroes walk among us unnoticed, their stories hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered? Do you feel it too? The desire to honor those quiet legends who shaped our lives without asking for recognition? If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, to be shared, then hit that subscribe button and help us give a voice to the forgotten ones. Every single day, the old man arrived before the first light touched the control tower. Not a minute early, not a second late. He didn't ask permission to be there, and no one ever stopped him. His truck, an old Ford pickup, had a pale green paint job that had long been bleached by the sun. One corner of the rear bumper was held together by duct tape, a reminder of some long-forgotten accident. There were no bumper stickers, no logos proclaiming his service, nothing that marked him as someone special. There was only one thing, a small, almost invisible magnet on the back of the truck with a single pair of wings. Not just any wings, though, these were the kind you earned once in a lifetime. They were the kind of wings that you carried with you forever. He always parked in the same spot, just outside the secondary maintenance gate, near the old fence that marked where the flight line once ended before the base expanded. From there, he would walk slowly, purposefully, past the chain-link fence and along the cracked concrete path overtaken by weeds and sand. He didn't carry a bag. He didn't wear sunglasses. He didn't even bring a chair. And yet, he stood there for hours, tall, silent, unmoving. His jacket, an olive drab relic from another time, was the same every day. It wasn't some imitation, nor was it part of a parade uniform. This jacket had been shaped by years of use, by decades of service. The patch on his chest had nearly faded, but if you looked closely, you could still see the name, W. Harland, ghosted into the fabric by years of sweat and sunlight. His cap, too, was worn. Black, embroidered with U.S. Air Force Veteran, in gold thread, but this wasn't a brand new cap. The edges were frayed, the threads dulled, and unlike the ones worn by those who only pretended to understand the weight of the title, this cap fit him like a helmet fits a soldier who's been through battle. Cadets often ran past him in groups, immersed in their training drills, sprints, or checklists. Most didn't even glance at him. A few might have whispered to each other, but the old man didn't respond. He stood still, not acknowledging them, not even with a nod. He wasn't there for them. Not yet. Instructors walked past, some making eye contact, some not. But the ones who had been around for longer simply let him be. They didn't know his story, but something in them told them not to interfere. He belonged there. He was a fixture. Something about him just felt like he was part of the airfield in a way no one could quite explain. Inside the small flight ops trailer, two junior lieutenants were sipping coffee one morning when one of them looked out the dusty window. "There he is again," one of them muttered, pointing toward the old man. The other lieutenant didn't even look up. "Same spot. Always freaky, right?" "Base ghost," the second one said with a smirk, but neither of them laughed. They didn't know who he was. No one did. He wasn't in the system, didn't have any active credentials. He never caused trouble, never crossed into restricted zones, and never said a word. Over time, people stopped asking questions. The old bench he stood next to had been there for decades. Once blue, now peeling, warped by sun and wind. It leaned slightly to the left. People rarely sat on it anymore, it was too exposed, too visible, and too far from the newer terminals. But the old man never sat on it. He just stood there, like he was guarding something no one could see. Sometimes, he would close his eyes for just a second, not to sleep, but to remember. And then, just as quickly, his eyes would snap open again, sharp and focused, watching everything around him. Every aircraft that taxied past. Every pilot who walked the line. Every jet that soared overhead. The jets had changed over the years. F-4s and A-10s used to roar across the tarmac. Now, the F-35 sliced through the air, sleeker, faster, quieter, but still, they were never as real as the ones from the past. The old man didn't react to the noise. His ears had long ago filtered out the sound. What he focused on wasn't the power of the machines, but the precision. The timing. The way the crew chiefs moved. The hesitation in a rookie pilot's step. The way a pilot held their helmet just a little too tightly. He wasn't just observing. He was evaluating. One afternoon, a tech sergeant noticed the old man and, out of curiosity, walked over. "Hey, sir," he said politely, not sure how to address him. "You need something?" The old man turned slowly, not unfriendly, but just, measuring. "No," he said, his voice dry like gravel. "You retired from here?" the sergeant asked. The old man looked back at the runway, then replied, "You could say that." The sergeant waited for more, but none came. He nodded slightly and backed off, understanding something unspoken. Some men don't need to explain themselves. Their presence says everything. Every morning, as fresh-faced cadets stepped onto the tarmac, ready for the day, the old man was there. He was a fixture. A ghost in the daylight. But it wasn't until one day, when a young pilot named Lieutenant Mark Beasley noticed him with new curiosity, that everything shifted. Beasley was sharp, ambitious, already one of the top performers in his class. His instructors saw it. His peers saw it. And Beasley saw it too, even if he didn't always understand what it meant. That morning, as Beasley went through his pre-flight checklist, he paused mid-step and glanced toward the old man standing by the fence. "Who's that guy?" Beasley asked, nodding toward him. The crew chief didn't look up. "Been here before I got here. Stands there every day. Doesn't talk. Doesn't move. Ghost, basically." Beasley tilted his head. "Is he allowed to be there?" "Don't ask, don't matter," the crew chief replied, tightening a bolt. "He's just there." Beasley couldn't stop watching. There was something in the old man's posture, rigid, composed, like someone waiting for orders. Not like a lost vet, but something sharper, colder. Something real. Later that morning, during a debriefing, the instructor, a former F-15 pilot, asked the cadets to consider a difficult scenario. Let's say you lose navigation and communications mid-climb, crosswinds, past the threshold. What do you do? The cadets responded quickly, "Follow tower light signal, sir," one said. "Wingman formation lead," another added. The instructor nodded. Right answers. But what if there's no wingman? What if the towers smoke and fire, and the only voice you can hear is the one inside your head? Do you trust it, or do you stall? He paused, then added, "There was a pilot once who flew blind, over hostile terrain, no visibility, no instruments, no help. Brought it back with 11 seconds of fuel and one flap. When asked how he did it, he said, I flew the sound of my own heartbeat." The name, Harland, was muttered by a logistics tech. The instructor didn't react, but Beasley's heart skipped a beat. Harland. The name rang in his mind, awakening something deep inside him. His grandfather had told him stories of a man who didn't take medals, didn't give interviews, and didn't come back from missions the same. A man who survived impossible skies, a man who defied the odds. Beasley turned his gaze toward the old man by the fence. He was still standing there, the same as ever. Watching. Waiting. Something twisted in Beasley's chest, like he recognized the old man's face without ever having seen it before. The rest of the morning passed in a blur, but Beasley couldn't focus. His body went through the motions, nodding, adjusting, climbing into the cockpit, but his mind kept drifting back to one name, one face, one unmoving figure by the fence, Harland. It wasn't a common name, and it wasn't something that could fade easily. It carried weight. History. Legacy. Beasley didn't have proof, but deep inside, something had shifted, like a compass locking onto a memory he hadn't realized mattered until now. As the squad prepared for a routine vertical climb exercise, Lieutenant Beasley stayed unusually quiet. He was scheduled to take the second jet in a 4-aircraft formation, clean air, clear visibility, standard maneuvering. On paper, it was just another day, another training session. But Beasley couldn't focus. His fingers moved mechanically over the controls, prepping the sequence, but something inside him felt distant, like his mind was elsewhere. The airfield, the jets, the mission, all of it felt less urgent. As he taxied toward the starting position, his gaze shifted through the canopy, out towards the perimeter fence. And there he was, the old man. Still standing there, just as he always did, a figure frozen in time at the edge of the tarmac. But this time, something felt different. The old man wasn't simply standing still as usual. He had one hand on the old bench by the fence, as if holding it together, preserving something no one could see. The image of him, solid and unmoving, was more vivid than ever, and Beasley couldn't look away. The world outside seemed to slow. The rest of the squad continued with their preparations, the hum of engines, the chatter of the ground crew, but Beasley felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He had flown hundreds of missions before, but today, something was different. The air felt thick, almost as though the weight of something unseen was pressing down on him. His thoughts kept pulling him back to that figure by the fence, standing silent and unmoving. The feeling wasn't one he could ignore. Inside the tower, a voice called out the formation ID. The jets aligned, one after the other, launching into the morning sky with flawless precision. Beasley followed protocol, checked the headings, and responded to the radio. But as the jets climbed higher, the more pressure seemed to build in his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something else, something deep, a sensation he couldn't quite place. Then, in the stillness of his thoughts, the voice of the instructor echoed in his mind, the sound of your own heartbeat. The words came to him with unexpected force. They didn't come from any textbook, from any briefing. No, those words were different. They were raw. They belonged to someone who had flown on pure instinct when systems failed. Someone like Harland. Beasley felt the weight of it. Those words were more than just a lesson on flying. They were something deeper, a reminder of something he couldn't yet fully understand. After the exercise, the squad regrouped in the open hangar for their post-flight review. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the tarmac as the ground crews refueled the jets. Pilots removed their helmets, wiped sweat from their brows, and shared notes about the flight. Beasley stayed behind, lingering under the hangar canopy, his helmet tucked beneath his arm, eyes still fixed on the distant figure by the fence. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the familiar scent of jet fuel and rubber. Beasley stood motionless, his mind wandering. A technician walked by, checklist in hand, and paused when he saw Beasley standing alone, staring into the distance. "You all right, Lieutenant?" the technician asked, his voice breaking through Beasley's thoughts. Beasley didn't respond immediately. His gaze was still locked on the old man across the field. "Do you know his name?" Beasley asked quietly, almost as though he had to ask. The technician followed his gaze. "The guy at the fence?" "Yeah," Beasley replied softly. The technician hesitated. They say it's Harland. Retired a long time ago. No one really talks to him. He just comes here every day, always at the same time. Leaves before dark. Beasley's grip tightened around his helmet. What did he do? He asked, his voice low. The technician's expression grew more serious. No one really knows. Some say he flew recon in the early 80s. Others think he was a test pilot, classified stuff. One guy swears he saw his photo in Okinawa 30 years ago, but his files are sealed. Even base command doesn't have full clearance on him. Beasley's mouth went dry. He has no access badge, he asked, almost surprised. The technician nodded. Doesn't need one. He doesn't enter secure areas. He just watches. Most people think he's harmless. But Beasley wasn't listening anymore. Something had clicked in his mind, and without a word, he turned and walked toward the edge of the hangar. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though something invisible was drawing him forward. He didn't know what he planned to do, or if he even needed to do anything, but there was a pull, something that couldn't be ignored. As Beasley approached the fence, he slowed. The old man was still there. His eyes were focused on the runway, his posture unmoving. He looked like a statue, carved from stone. His jawline was sharp, his gaze unflinching, like he was part of the earth itself. The air seemed to hold its breath around him. Beasley stopped just a few meters away. The heat from the tarmac shimmered between them, but the old man didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge Beasley's presence. "Sir," Beasley said softly. The old man's eyes flicked toward him for just a second before returning to the runway. He didn't speak, didn't move. "I heard someone say your name," Beasley said, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man didn't respond. "Harland?" Beasley asked, his throat tight. The man exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in a calm, measured breath, as though he were pondering the weight of the question. "You shouldn't say that name unless you know what it means," Harland replied, his voice steady, as if delivering a lesson. Beasley swallowed hard. "I don't," he admitted, "but I think I need to." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The wind rustled the chain-link fence, and somewhere in the distance, a jet engine fired up. But all Beasley could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, as though the entire world had stopped moving. And then, Harland spoke again. "You fly with your hands, then with your eyes, then with your instincts. But when all of those go dark, the only thing you have left is who you are." Beasley nodded slowly, though the meaning of the words eluded him. He wasn't sure if it was a riddle or an answer, but somehow, deep down, he knew it was both. The loudspeaker crackled to life, calling the next rotation to prepare. Beasley turned his head slightly but then glanced back toward the fence. Harland had already started walking away, his silhouette shrinking against the sunlight, his shoulders squared, as if returning to a duty that no one else could understand. Beasley stood there for a long time, even after the old man was gone. A few minutes later, the flight instructor found Beasley, asking why he wasn't suiting up. Beasley's voice was calm as he answered, "Sir, who trained you?" The instructor paused, looking at Beasley with a confused expression. "Why do you ask?" Beasley didn't reply. He simply stared at the empty space where Harland had stood. The instructor took a deep breath and muttered under his breath, "God damn." He didn't answer the question because there was only one name that could stop a man mid-sentence like that. And now Beasley understood exactly why. Over the next few days, something subtle changed at the airfield. Harland's silhouette, once just a shadow, now held weight. The same trainees who had once rushed past him, barely acknowledging his presence, now slowed down as they passed. Some turned their heads to glance at him. Others stood a little taller when they saw him. He hadn't changed. He still arrived at the same time every morning, parked in the same spot, walked with the same deliberate pace toward the same section of fence, and stood motionless for hours. But now, no one treated him like a ghost anymore. Word had spread, not through announcements, but in the quiet exchanges between instructors, in murmured conversations near the lockers, and in respectful nods from the older techs. Someone in admin tried to pull his personnel file, but it came back redacted, pages missing, whole deployments sealed. One name. Dozens of citations. But almost nothing else, except for one line buried deep in a scanned paper from 1987, classified crash, recovered black box, no team. Beasley had returned to his routine, but something inside him had changed. His instructors noticed it first, not in his flying, which remained as sharp as ever, but in his focus. He wasn't just watching the controls anymore. He was watching the air, feeling the angles, trusting his instincts in a way he hadn't before. When asked to explain a particularly precise maneuver during an advanced simulation, Beasley didn't cite procedure. Instead, he simply said, "I followed the silence." The phrase began to spread throughout the squad, whispered in classrooms and briefing rooms. The older pilots nodded when they heard it. The younger ones tried to grasp its meaning. 2 weeks later, during a training demonstration for visiting brass, Beasley was selected to lead a solo flyby above the field. He didn't request it. He didn't even know why he had been chosen. But as he climbed into the cockpit that morning, his breath steady and his hands calm, he did something he hadn't done before. As the jet taxied toward the runway, he glanced at the fence. Harland was there, standing tall, arms folded behind his back, his hat casting a sharp shadow over his brow. Their eyes met for just a moment. A moment long enough for something to pass between them, a silent understanding that no briefing could teach. Beasley gave the faintest nod, not a greeting, but an acknowledgement. Then he pulled his helmet on and locked in. The flyby was flawless. Tight lines. Clean brakes. A perfect dive and climb sequence that rolled smoothly over the field like a thread of thunder. The generals applauded politely. The instructors, more enthusiastically. But the most meaningful reaction came not from the tower or the reviewing stand, but from Harland, who, for the first time anyone had seen, gave the slightest tilt of his chin and shifted his stance just barely. After the event, Beasley returned to the locker room, unzipped his flight suit, and sat quietly, wiping his gloves with a cloth. A junior cadet entered, wide-eyed and filled with admiration. He looked at Beasley as if he were seeing a legend. But Beasley only asked, "You know who Harland is?" The cadet shrugged. "Some old guy." Beasley didn't lecture him. He simply handed him a folded piece of paper, a photocopy of the 1987 crash report. Redacted, but with one line highlighted in pen, landed with no fuel, no gear, and one wing half-sheared. Guided by instinct and silence. The cadet stared at it for a long moment before looking back at Beasley. "He taught you?" "No," Beasley replied. "He taught everyone. We just didn't know it." That evening, as the sun began to set and the airfield grew quiet, a small group of instructors walked out past the hangars toward the old fence line. Harland wasn't there. For the first time in months, maybe years, his place was empty. The bench untouched. The space silent. No one spoke. Then one of the senior pilots placed something down on the bench, a folded American flag, precisely creased. Next to it, a simple brass plaque already engraved. "To the one who flew when no one could. You were never just watching. You were still flying." They didn't hold a ceremony. No names were read. No orders were issued. But the next morning, without instruction, four jets flew a low pass over the field. At the end of the formation, one peeled away into the sky. He never asked for recognition. Never corrected those who looked past him. He didn't wear medals. He didn't carry photos. He just showed up every single morning, standing where memory meets motion, where silence carries more weight than orders. Some men disappear loudly. Others vanish by choice. And some, like Harland, remain in plain sight because they understand the value of stillness in a world too quick to forget. He didn't need to be saluted. He didn't need to be named. But when the sky opened that morning and one jet pulled away from the others in silent formation, everyone on the ground understood that empty space in the air wasn't a maneuver. It was a tribute, a final acknowledgement to the man who had once flown when others failed and who never stopped watching. In a world that constantly demands more, it's easy to overlook the quiet warriors who shape our lives without fanfare. Harlan's presence reminds us of the power of silence, of the strength found in stillness, and how true legends often go unnoticed. We live in an era that celebrates noise and spectacle, yet the most profound lessons often come from those who don't seek recognition. Perhaps, we should stop and listen more, acknowledging the ones who make a difference without asking for anything in return. Maybe that's where real strength and wisdom lie. Some stories aren't written in books. They're carved into the way others walk, fly, breathe. So now, I ask you, have you ever known someone like that? Someone whose presence meant more than their words. Someone who shaped everything around them without asking for anything in return. Tell us in the comments. Share their name. Share what they gave you. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe, ring that bell, and never miss a moment of this journey. Let's keep honoring the silent sacrifices that keep us standing, stronger than ever. Catch you in the next one.